Hi, everyone. It's Denise Brown from caringourway.com, and I'm going to do a 20-minute presentation around the art of storytelling. And I'm doing this because of our Caregiving Listener Project. I have family caregivers and former family caregivers who tell me they want to tell a story, but they're just not sure what the story is. And I thought it would be helpful to think through what's the art of telling a story. I should mention in our Caregiving Listener Project, we connect a storyteller with a trained listener in a private Zoom room. And we do that because the story you tell is about releasing what weighs too heavy for you. You might have been silent too long with a story, and we want to give you an opportunity to tell it in a private space with a trained listener who only wants to learn more about the story, who isn't interested in judging you or telling you what to do, but is solely interested in what's the story and solely committed to receiving it. Okay, so let's start. I did a version of this presentation this past summer, and I did it for patient advocates. So I tweaked it a little bit so that if you're in a caregiving situation or post-caregiving situation, this will be helpful for you. And what happened after I did this presentation for patient advocates was one of the advocates then said, I need to get out there and tell my story more. I thought that was interesting. It was helpful to understand the art of storytelling. So you tell your story more and more. And again, for our Caregiving Listener Project, it's really about telling your story privately because it's something that weighs too heavy on you and it's time to release it. Okay, so just quickly about me, I started working with family caregivers in 1990, launched one of the very first online caregiving communities in 1996, and helped my parents. And always in my work was this just incredible appreciation for stories. I'm a writer, and when I connected to family caregivers, it all made sense to me. I knew what to write about. I knew how to stay present in a story, and I couldn't get enough of caregiving stories. That's what has kept me in this space for 34 years. It's how powerful your stories are. The caregiving stories changed my career. It changed my work. And it wasn't my story that changed it. It was hearing your story. That's how powerful stories are. And that's why it's so important to take care of our stories and to think through how do we share them. I think we have many reasons for telling stories. And certainly for our Caregiving Listener Project, we're telling stories because we want to release them. They are weighing too heavy on us. But we also tell stories as a way to connect. Sometimes we tell a story to resolve it in our head. If I talk it out, I'll hear what happened and then I'll understand maybe that I was a little too hard on myself or that there were so many circumstances out of my control. I did the best I could. We can also tell stories to inspire others. And we see that in documentaries we watch and books we read. The stories of others who have overcome and who now lead meaningful lives is inspiring for us. You have a similar story. We can also share a story to inform. And I think that in our caregiving experience, a lot of the stories we tell are informing healthcare professionals about what's going on with our caree. So sometimes the stories of informing are weary for us. We're tired of always informing. Oh my gosh, here's what you need to know. Here's why that won't work. Here's why something else will work. Yeah. Okay. And then we also can actually advocate for change through the stories that we tell. This is just a few ideas of why we tell stories. There's so many more reasons that we tell stories. I actually will probably add to heal too. We can tell a story just to ourselves in order to heal what has happened. Okay. It's also important to remember that we can tell stories for an audience or just for ourselves. And today we're really going to use some storytelling skills to tell stories for ourselves. Now, I might ask you to share a story out loud, and then it's for all of us, but it's not required. It's not required. It's just important to know that we often think about storytelling as something in front of an audience. And sometimes the most important audience for our stories is ourselves. Which reminds me of the importance of what story we're telling ourselves. We can change our story at any time to be a story that better serves ourselves. Okay, so let's look at the elements of a story. And this is what I believe. A story has a beginning, middle, and end. We often think about adding a lot to a story, and I think it's important that we start with this. And as you think of stories, you might have a story about a moment. And in that story about a moment, there's still going to be a beginning, a middle, and an end. How it starts, what happens because it started, and then what's the closure. Sometimes the ending to a story is because of time, meaning that if you tell a story about one moment, the story ends when that moment is up. A story could end without having closure or resolution. It could just simply be a story in a chapter. And you are writing your book as you live life. Each moment could contain a story that becomes part of a chapter. And it might not be how the chapter ends. It could just be how this moment ends, a relationship ends, a situation ends. And again, it does not mean that there's always resolution at the end of a story. It could be how this ends, which sets you up for the next story. Years ago, I heard this really helpful insight about endings, that when we have a good ending, we give ourselves a good beginning. And you can think about the story that you want to write or share as having an ending that starts the next story for you. Let's do a little bit of writing about stories. And we're going to write stories using 6 words. And you might think, that's not enough. So here is what you can do when you need more. You can use hyphens. And you have unlimited hyphens available to you. You can hyphenate 8 words. And those 8 hyphenated words make up 1 word. You might think, well, what am I going to write about with 6 words? How possible is that? I started using 6-word prompts probably in 2010. Yeah, wow. And I actually borrowed the idea from Smith Magazine. They will share prompts to help you write a 6-word story. Sometimes they do 10-word stories. I have done that as well. I don't know why I'm so attached to 6 words, but I find it so helpful to think about basically what's the bottom line of my story. And that's what 6-word story writing gets to. What's the bottom line? Here are some ideas for you as you write a 6-word story. These are just some ideas. It might be that you think, oh, I'm not really willing today to write about the worst day, but you know what? I might write about the best day. And then there are moments in our caregiving experience that are ripe for storytelling, including diagnosis day, a particular holiday, or a significant moment. So for this exercise, we're just getting used to writing with 6 words, and these are prompts that could help. You could write a 6-word story about what happened before you started watching this or joining me live. Here's what 6-word stories can look like. I felt swallowed by too much. And you can see how this sets up the next story. And the next story is about too much. Pressure of preventing and predicting overwhelmed. Wow. And again, you can see how this 6-word story sets up the next story. I lost it because they left. Alone with tears while they celebrated. And these stories that I'm offering as examples, I didn't use hyphens. And I just want to let you know that I'm okay when you use hyphens. These actually are stories that have been inspired by my caregiving experience. I was swallowed by caregiving when my parents were both critically ill at the same time. I think we have this intense pressure to always read the future so that we can prevent what could happen. And that's a hard way to live. I lost it because they left. Happened at the end of my mom's life. My siblings just didn't get how much care was required. So they're like, the hospital bed arrived. We had lunch. We're going. I mean, wow. Interestingly enough, those are additional versions of 6-word stories. Like you could do hospital bed arrived, hospital bed and lunch arrived, hospital bed and lunch arrived. Alone. So your 6-word stories also could be phrases, doesn't have to be a complete sentence. And the next one is alone with tears while they celebrated. My dad had COVID over Christmas, the Christmas before he died. And my siblings were like, well, we've got holiday plans. So there I was with my dad and COVID and my tears. Okay. If anybody is live with me and wants to share a story, please let me know. I'd love to hear it. I can see some live attendees working on a story. So I'm going to just enjoy a little bit of silence in case someone is like that close to having it and wants a chance to share it out loud. And if you are joining me live and you think, I am not going to say it out loud, you can also wave me on. Keep going, Denise. I am not going to share it. I also just want to mention that we're talking about writing stories, and you can see how this can translate into journaling. If you just spent a moment at the end of the day and wrote a 6-word story about something that happened, think about your journal. It would be this container of stories that you could go back to and work out. Okay, Kim, go for it.
Thank you for giving me a little time to kind of think through. I think I went for, I love the topic that you gave for Diagnosis Day, um, because I felt like that instantly is where my brain went. And for me, my six-word story was shocked in silence while giving comfort. And I feel like, because I was just sitting there thinking, and I love that you said that it will flow into journaling because instantly after I said that story or that sentence, I wanted to write more about, oh, what was going on during that time. And but again, like you said, the beauty of the six words is it gets to the heart of, what the bottom line of the story. And that really would be the bottom line of my story.
Repeat it for me.
Sure. Shocked in silence while giving comfort.
Oh, wow. I mean, you know, okay, so first of all, I have chills because I can imagine sitting in a small room with big news while someone is devastated sitting next to you. And it's that pivot from, okay, this is terrible. I just have to put myself aside and focus in on my Carrie. Yeah. And it would have been your mom for you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Wow.
it's interesting, Denise, because as I'm sitting here and talking to you about it and just writing it down, I'm thinking, gosh, that actually was kind of the theme of my caregiving experience, actually. I mean, not so much maybe shocked in silence, but maybe even changing that word to struggling in silence. Um, because I did have to be kind of stoic at times so that we can get through uh, the different stages, when the health or when her health was really starting to decline, or um, I don't know, fun dynamics between family members. Like it's kind of like you don't have time to fall apart. You just have to keep being a support system and comforting, your caree. And for like you said, for me, it was my mother. So that's so interesting.
You used some great words, and I didn't get all of them. So, what I heard was stoic, struggling, shocked. There was another fourth word that begins with S, I think.
Um, Now my brain.
Oh, it's okay.
Um,
Tell me your story again. Read your six-word story.
sure. So I said it was shocked in silence while giving comfort. Oh, silence? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, wow. Here's what else you could do. You could pull out those four words and write six-word stories about each of those words.
Mm.
And I'm going to repeat those words because any family caregiver could write about those four words: stoic, struggling, shocked, silence. Wow. 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 Powerful. That is a great example about how this one story inspires the next stories. What's interesting is with six-word stories, it ends with a period. And then we move to the next six-word story. Okay. And this is a great segue because that's what you were doing for us, Kim, was to color in and around the lines of your story. And you could think of the lines of your story as the words in those 6-word stories. And we pulled out four that are just like, wow. So then you're going to start to add in the parts of the story that actually bring it to life. The who, what, when, why, how. For your story, Kim, you're going to add in it's you and your mom, for instance. It's what? Diagnosis day. The why is around why you're feeling as you're feeling because of just what just happened. The when could be a Tuesday morning. The how could be how are we going to keep going? How does your mom respond? How do you respond? I want to go back to the who for just a minute. The who is also the doctor. So I'm just going to blurt out something that could become a 4-minute story. You could see how interesting this is to actually use 4 minutes as also the natural ending. So my mom and I sat in the small exam room. The doctor sat in front of us with his clipboard and his curt tone. He said to my mom, "You have this diagnosis." Oh my gosh, in my head, I was thinking, why us? Why us? Why us? And then you can move into, so when we heard the news, I could feel my mom's body change. It was like she had an invisible slump, and I could feel my body change because I felt this stress and tension pulling me up. My mom got smaller, I got bigger. And then I thought through, how are we going to make it through this moment? And I decided the how is I will remain silent to my struggle in order to comfort my mom. Okay, so that story took probably about a minute. So you could see how just adding a little bit more to it builds it out. And you could add in more and more. And 4 minutes seems like that's not long enough. And it is. It can be. It can be. Okay, Kim, how are you feeling about building out that story?
It's interesting because to see you do that example, one, it was scarily accurate, and two, it's I really do love the tie-in from starting these 6-word stories and how it really does dive into journaling and story writing because, yeah, easily I could see me spending a lot of time on like, oh, okay, the what and the when, or specifically the how. How did this make us feel? And yeah, no, I think it'd be pretty easy to do. I also think it would be such an handy um, healing tool, because I mean, I'm feeling effects already just by discussing it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. We do have a writing wheel. And so if any of you have attended any of my workshops or completed any of our training programs, Kim is one of our newest certified caregiving consultants, you know that there's a wheel for everything. So here's our writing wheel. I think it's helpful to think about what could I write about? Again, sometimes it's intimidating to think about, well, I have this blank piece of paper. What do I do with it? And you could use any of these words to just start writing a 6-word story. And I used the word mine in here because it can mean so many different things depending on what the day was like. And then I also picked sleep because boy, do we want it. And it seems like sometimes we just can't get it. If you are feeling like I don't know what to write, you could use this writing wheel. So there's a couple different prompts for you to look at. It could be a situation, an experience, a moment, a relationship, and it also could just be a word. I write weekly comforts and post them in our space on caringourway.com for family caregivers. It's in our caregiving support section. And I take one word and write about it. If you want inspiration, you could look for those. So they're called weekly caregiving comforts. And then I pulled all of those comforts and turned them into books. And so there's 5 books that are very simple to read. Each page, pretty much each page, has one word that I've written reflections about. You can be inspired by those to write your own. Just want to do a little bit of plug for our listener project because you can see these stories are so good. And we want to connect you to a good listener. And our listeners are actually trained volunteers. That's what's so great about this Caregiving Listener Project. And they are trained to listen, to understand, to be curious, to focus on your story, to learn more about your story, not to focus on your story so that they can pivot you to what's the better perspective? What's the better way to look at this? What's the gift? That's toxic positivity. And that is not helpful. And we're also, as trained volunteers, equipped with good questions to ask. And then we also know to thank you for your good story. Okay, so our next Caregiving Listener Project is February 22nd. So you can actually sign up in January for a slot to tell a 4-minute story and connect with your trained volunteer listener for about 20 minutes. You tell a 4-minute story, and we just figured out how to craft them. And then your trained listener engages in a conversation about that story. And again, it takes about 20 minutes. If you are interested in using stories for advocacy, our certified caregiving advocate training program is free this month. And I'm also doing a live training for advocates. And you can check our event schedule on caringourway.com to join me live. And I think it's on a Saturday morning. I try to do some things around lunchtime during the week and then on Saturday mornings, knowing that you're busy. I'm trying to accommodate your busy schedule. And I also don't want to take up a lot of your time. So we're actually going to finish at about 30 minutes. Okay. Any last questions, Kim, before we close?
No, I just think that I'm just again, my brain is just thinking of all types of ideas and stories now. Just so I'm so glad that I was able to sit with this, because I truly do feel that caregivers have so many stories. And I think that's just the whole beauty of this caregiving support space is allowing them to kind of shift from the focus to who they're caring for, but to themselves and to have a space to share some of those stories. It really is healing, and I love this whole concept. So thank you, Denise.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for joining me today. Okay, so we're going to close. I think I'm going to do more of these because this was really fun. I wasn't sure how it was going to go, but it was really fun. So I think I'm going to do more of them. And maybe what we'll do is themes around the 6-word stories. That would be fun too. Okay, Kim, thank you so much for joining me today. Yeah. And thanks to those who are watching the archive. Please share your 6-word stories as a comment or on our community, Carrying Our Way. will continue to write these stories because they are powerful. And then remember to join us February 22nd for our Caregiving Listener Project. Okay, thanks everyone.